Hey everybody, Mr. Harvey here. Gonna kind of jump right into our lecture, and today I'm gonna talk a little bit about the Philosophes and talk about some of the key thinkers during the Enlightenment. So earlier today, I was talking about the causes to the Enlightenment. You should be familiar with that, and I was talking about kind of a little bit about what the Enlightenment was, and I was introducing it. I want to introduce some of the thinkers now, and some of our main people that we're going to be discussing. These are the critics, the writers, the historians, the economists that are going to be flourishing in this print culture of people, learning how to read, the wide distribution of texts, and these are people who are going to be really challenging the status quo politically, economically, socially, legally. And so these are the people that we are going to really delve into, and there's a couple of them that we're going to really focus on in depth. Now, these aren't all like philosophers. These are, writers. These are professors. These are historians, like I kind of said, politicians who are going to, commonly the thread that kind of links them together is that they're going to be using reason, and they're going to be using logic and rationality to argue their point of view, to argue their challenges to the status quo. And so these people are going to be, it's how they kind of argue about and how they argue for their ideas, and their challenges to the status quo. So these people are going to be found in London, having a party at a coffee house and inviting people, and they're going to be drinking coffee, talking about freedom of religion, or what's the purpose of a government, what are humans' natural rights. What is the right kind of government? How should government be organized? They're gonna find, they're gonna all socialize and be discussing these ideas amongst people, and people are gonna be discussing these ideas all over Europe. You can find them at taverns. We're gonna talk about the salon movement. They're even, some of these thinkers are even going to be invited to the courts of powerful monarchs. Catherine the Great is going to love Voltaire, and she's going to be very much influenced by some of his ideas. Other monarchs, not so much, and he's going to get kicked out of some places. But we're going to see these Philosophes have a tremendous impact on European intellectual society and the status quo, and we're going to really see them challenge the status quo. Now, this wasn't like an organized crew. It's not like they're the Philosophe crew and they walk around like a band or something like that. And a lot of them actually disagreed with one another on issues. Hobbes is going to disagree with John Locke. We're going to see, Mary Wollstonecraft. She's going to directly call out Rousseau and his sexist ideas concerning women. So some of these thinkers didn't really like or respect each other, and they may have disagreed. But the point is that these philosophers are arguing for change in the name of reason. They're arguing using logic and reason, and commenting on the political, economic, social, cultural, legal state of Europe. Many of their readers, and we're going to talk more about the middle class and the rising middle class later, but many of their readers came from the middle class who could afford books. Some of their readers will come from lower classes who are going to be able to read and with some of their money afford texts to read. The bulk of their readership is going to come from the middle class who had that income to buy all that literature. And these readers, in turn, and this is the cyclical effect, are going to, read these texts, and they're going to talk about it with one another. They're going to sit at a tavern, and they're going to sit at a coffee shop, have some coffee, and they're going to talk about these ideas and be very much influenced and circulate these ideals and spread the Enlightenment. All right, our first thinker is going to be Thomas Hobbes. Take a look at the date of which he lived. Okay, it's going to be very important. This historical context will be very important in understanding him. And he's going to be one of our first Philosophes. Now, he doesn't have really any radical new ideas. He's actually going to argue in favor of absolutism. But what makes him important, and one of the first Philosophes that we're going to discuss, is how he does that. And that's logic and reason. That's what kind of separates Thomas Hobbes. Now, he was greatly influenced by the scientific revolution. He knew Descartes. He knew Galileo. and he was a fervent reader of William Harvey's. And so he is going to be very much influenced by reason and that scientific thinking. And he's going to look at politics and society through that lens of scientific thinking. However, if you look at the date of which he lived, this will really tell you about how he's going to view the world and how he's going to kind of comment on politics. He lived through the English Civil War. He's an Englishman. And so we're going to see Thomas Hobbes be very much like Machiavelli, influenced by what he sees. Thomas Hobbes is our first modern political scientist. And he is going to be very much, and I like to compare him with Machiavelli because Thomas Hobbes is going to be very pessimistic, very emo. And he is not going to think very highly of man because of what he's seen. Similar to Machiavelli. Think back to Machiavelli and what we saw with him during the Italian campaigns, France, coming through into Italy and ruining it with the Ludovic of Milan. Remember, inviting France in, and really the HRE gets involved, Spain gets involved, and really ruins any chance for Italian unity, and that really hurt Machiavelli, and we talked about that. So Thomas Hobbes is going to be very similar. What did he believe? His book, The Leviathan, is one that we need to know. This book is so important. And this is where he is going to argue in favor of absolutism. He argued for an absolute government. He argued in favor of absolutism. Now, you all are probably thinking to yourselves, what's so revolutionary and what's so, how is this challenging the status quo? He's not. It's how he's arguing. His use of logic, his use of reason within the Leviathan. And what he argued is that human beings are bad. Okay? Human beings are bad. Okay? And you need a king to keep them under control, because if they have some power, if humans have some power, if humans aren't controlled, they're going to ruin everything. Just like in the English Civil War, all that death, all that destruction, that was caused by humans because humans are bad. And so he is going to really be a pessimistic thinker and view that humans need to be controlled by an absolute government because of all the horror that he saw in the English Civil War. He believes that humans are self-centered, okay, and that humans are in constant need for power. And if they are constantly competing for power, then it means that they're going to constantly be fighting around power. So you need to control humans. That's his big idea. You need to control them, okay, because they're self-centered and because they're always competing for power. It's always going to lead to fights, okay? So what he believed is that the only way for humans, to kind of, stop their self-centeredness is to be controlled by an absolute monarch and to enter into a social contract. Highlight that word in your notes, social contract. We're going to come back to it. It's very important. Okay, but here's the social contract: is that humans are going to be safe if they agree to be loyal to a monarch. The monarch is going to the monarch is going to take care of these people. In order, aka to keep them safe, from invaders and whatnot. But they have to have absolute loyalty to their monarch. And he argued that it's okay to use force and it's okay for absolute policies to be enacted, because that's the only way to enforce this social contract. You have to control humans. Okay, you have to control them. They're self-centered, and the only way to control them is to, get their obedience and get their fealty. And that's what he's arguing. Okay, and there's his text, Leviathan. Okay, very famous. And you can see, look here, okay, in the cover, there's the monarch, okay, crown, kind of presiding, overlooking the land. Okay, and that shows you that he favors an absolute monarch. Okay, that people need to enter into a social contract with an absolute monarch in order to, be safe and behave. It's the only way they can behave themselves. Okay, John Locke. Super key, super important, okay? Let's talk about him. He wrote a couple important texts, his most important being the two treatises of government. We need to know that, okay? Very, 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 very important, okay? And in his two treatises, okay, this is going to be the fundamental text that he writes, and it's going to be very influential to the American and French revolutions. Okay, and his ideas. Well, here's a whole bunch of his books in his text: The Letter of Toleration, Two Treatises on Government, Some Thoughts Concerning Education, The Reasonableness of Christianity. But the one I want us to know is the Two Treatises of Government. Okay, let's talk about his philosophy. Okay, his Two Treatises of Government. He is going to defend the Glorious Revolution, and he is going to articulate a philosophical defense for it, and argue against absolutism. So he is kind of the complete opposite of Thomas Hobbes. Okay, this is John Locke. He's the complete opposite of Hobbes. And what he argued were that humans were good. Okay, he argued that humans are good. Okay, and that humans should have natural rights, and that the role of government is to protect humans, not kind of control them like Hobbes was arguing. So he argues that humans need a government not to control them, but to protect them and protect their unalienable rights. And he lists 3 important unalienable rights, and that's the purpose of government, is to protect these rights. These rights are life, liberty, and property. Note how similar they are going to be. Note the similarity they are to the Declaration of Independence. In the Declaration of Independence, which is produced much, much later, about 100 years later, Thomas Jefferson is going to say, well, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that, that humans have, that citizens have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He is taking that is a direct influence of John Locke on the American Revolution. And so Locke is arguing that humans have natural rights, unalienable rights, and it's the job of the government to protect these rights. And he argues that the doctrine of divine right of kings is nonsense, okay? And that Locke is going to be arguing, let me see if I got it right here, that if a government does not protect these rights, that people have the right to overthrow that government and revolt. This is going to be so influential to the French revolutions and American revolutions. America is going to be like, hey, no taxation without representation. We're going to talk about this. You're not protecting our rights. You're not protecting our rights. And they are going to be directly influenced by what John Locke is saying. That if a government isn't protecting your rights, well, it's time for a new one. It's time for a new one. And so he is going to be arguing that people have the right to overthrow a government. Okay, he favored a republic. America is a republic, and he argued against the divine right of kings, absolutism. So he's very, 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 very much different from Hobbes. Okay, he did favor religious toleration, except for Roman Catholics, and we'll talk more about religious toleration later with Voltaire. And he wrote an essay on psychology that I find really fascinating that I want to really quickly talk about. He believed that humans were born a blank slate. He believed in the tabula rasa. And he believed that its experiences and that human development really depends on an environment and human experiences in the world. And it's so true. I think about, myself, as someone who grew up in California, and I have like my accent and the way that I talk versus someone who may have grown up in England, right? And I've talked about like how my accent makes me stand out. Whenever I travel abroad, people are like, what is going on with this guy? Human development depends on the environment and depends on people's experiences. And you all can, kind of relate to this. Many of you are in my classes are bilingual, okay? Even though we've grown up, roughly 6 miles apart in Oxnard and in Ventura, we have different experiences in different way. Our different environments have shaped our lives. So very fascinating work of psychology. He also argued for education, and that education was super key to human development and social development. And he was a big proponent of education. And we are going to see education later on, 1700s, 1800s, become very, very important and eventually accessible and public to all. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to talk more about Voltaire in class because he's awesome.